What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. OMEN is a cancelled champion in League of Legends, and a lot of you guys have probably heard about him since he's honestly probably the second most famous cancelled champion, behind of course only the notorious Ao Shin. And OMEN was officially cancelled quite a while back, but it's definitely interesting to take a look at what OMEN was maybe set up to be like. So join us today in taking an in-depth look back at this Forgotten League champion to find out what OMEN could have been. And as always, if you guys enjoy the video, definitely hit that like button and let's get started. So OMEN was described by Riot to be like this quadruped champion sort of guy who actually looked pretty badass on the surface, and he was set up for release in Season 1 actually before being cancelled, with Riven being released in his place. He actually did go through a ton of iterations in design in both his appearance and his gameplay kit, but the concept art we have so far suggests that he was meant to be like this mischievous demon sort of creature, covered in spikes, with a smile like the Cheshire Cat from Alice in Wonderland. Now, both iterations we have found art for show that he would have been like a pretty colorful sort of character, maybe like a blood red, but actually at one point they even tried making him like green with bright blue spikes if you just take a look at the concept arts we have. His hide ranged from looking kind of scaly, maybe armor plated in areas, to having like fuzzy bits of hair that almost kind of looked like fire, which was always like a super cool effect and would definitely look really cool in game. Now these iterations of OMEN were actually for a ranged DPS build, with the idea that he would attack by firing those spines that he has on his back at his enemies. But he actually went through testing as pretty much every single role, and that's probably the biggest problem of his design. Once Riot has designed a champion's appearance, they really believe that players should pretty much be able to instantly recognize what kind of role the character would likely play in a game. It's kind of like a visual information, you know, like if you saw like a huge dude that was really bulky, built like a truck, you know, you wouldn't expect that character to be like a quick mobile assassin, you know, you'd expect them to be like a tank. And for OMEN, his appearance kind of pushed him into the sort of territory of looking like stealthy and mischievous, but that was never really how he was designed to play at all. So usually Riot designs a champion and then that design influences the gameplay kit, but because OMEN kinda ended up looking a little bit generic, they ended up pushing loads and loads of all sorts of different kits to try and just force his design to make sense, and using that approach just wouldn't result in a high quality release. And of course OMEN was cancelled after the development team agreed that he was kind of just wasting design space, and Riot decided that instead of wasting the design space of like this cool reptilian monster on a project that would always be missing something really important and could never be as good as they wanted it to be, the team working on OMEN decided to just put him aside completely and devote their time into something that had a lot more potential, which actually ended up being Graves, by the way. So if OMEN was in the game, Graves might not have been. But to be honest, at the time that pretty much paid off, because we got Graves, and later on down the line from OMEN's concepts, from OMEN's design space, we actually got Rek'Sai, who after all has been a pretty decent success and did fix a lot of the issues that OMEN was having. So the biggest lead on we have of what OMEN could have been in terms of like gameplay especially was of course a quote from Riot Xenon, and this quote from Riot Xenon is actually very interesting to me because Riot Xenon's, you know, he's a head champion designer, he's very high up in the champion design team, but the thing is that there are a lot of other champion designers that completely deny this quote. They just say that it just isn't true outright, which is really funny to me because it really doesn't seem like something that Riot Xenon would just kind of throw out for no reason or just say something that if it wasn't true. And he said on a Reddit post that a lot of what we tried to do with OMEN went into Rek'Sai, and he's the guy that, you know, he did work on OMEN and he worked on Rek'Sai. And personally, I trust him to be correct about this kind of thing a lot more than some of the other designers that have mentioned otherwise. Some of the bits and pieces here and there of writers saying that Rek'Sai did not get inspiration from OMEN. Now, what we do know for sure about OMEN is that, you know, through his numerous iterations and stuff, he was shoved into pretty much every role possible. You know, he was tried as a jungler, he was tried as a melee DPS, as a ranged DPS, and everything else too pretty much, while Riot tried to find the right identity for him. I believe he went through something around 20 iterations or so, and obviously we don't know what. And of course, with that in mind, this quote from Riot Xenon could be the key to understanding what OMEN could have been like during his melee iteration. And since they designed Omen's character and his, the way he looked before actually designing his gameplay, we know that he was always kind of set up to be the sort of demon-y sort of guy that you saw in the concept art. So although the concept art we have suggests that he was maybe a little bit too scrawny to be kind of like Rek'Sai, who's a lot bulkier and stuff, it's definitely worth considering that the different versions of Omen might have kept the whole demon reptile theme together while also changing a little bit of things. Give him some claws for melee attacks maybe, or maybe you could just bulk him up a little bit so he looked like he could take a hit. If you take the images of Omen we have here, add a little bit of weight to him, 20 pounds or so, toughen him up a little bit, add some claws, add some teeth, you literally just end up with Rek'Sai right there. So that's definitely really cool actually, because it means that at least for Omen's melee iteration, he would play or at least kind of fight the same way Rek'Sai does now. And I definitely think it's likely that Omen's Q or E could have definitely been like how Rek'Sai's is now. Now, in all honesty, the burrow mechanic on Rek'Sai though was probably not tested on Omen because it's a very modern piece of design, and considering the fact that Omen was designed in 2010, the burrow probably wasn't on his kit, but other things like the Q, the AoE cleave on the auto attacks, or maybe building up another resource bar to provide like this true damage bite, his E essentially in the unbow, definitely could have been viable ways to make Omen's melee iteration work, or at least versions that they tested of him. So this idea of like thrashing around and biting and stuff is like a really kind of aggressive way of attacking that's very unlike most of the other champions in League, except for maybe Volibear, but Volibear wasn't made at the time, so it's pretty likely that that is where Omen got the inspiration for Rek'Sai from. And Rek'Sai is kind of designed around the idea that she's like this primitive creature from the void that wants to defend her territory. So that primitive and territorial nature, that aggressive sort of abilities, was definitely a part of Omen's design early on and was just later shifted onto Rek'Sai when Riot decided they wanted to take another shot at the voidling sort of demon-like concept. Now, the concept art we showed earlier is actually all about the ranged DPS, the 80 carry iteration of Omen though. And there's definitely a lot of room to imagine what that version of Omen would have been like in the game as well. And this iteration of Omen's design really combined 3 separate niches almost. He's got like the spikes going on that he shoots at people, he's got like the 4-leg sort of demon kind of guy, and he's got like that, that really like creepy kind of sassy smile, like the Cheshire cat appearance almost. And Omen's weapon in this form of course were his spines, and they're described as Riot as being bio-organic, with the idea that he would shoot these spikes out as a basic attack. And that doesn't entirely give us clues to his actual abilities, but we can definitely expect that he was pretty mobile thanks to his sort of sleek and aerodynamic body almost in a sense, and the extra mobility that you would get from being on all fours of course. And maybe he was just naturally quick on his feet, or maybe he had like a jump ability that would propel himself in like a direction to help him with kiting or something, or maybe he just got some bonus movement speed. The only part of his visual appearance here that isn't entirely coming into play is that like creepy sort of feel that he's got going on with that smile. And from that, it actually hints that unlike Rek'Sai, this iteration of Omen was maybe a little bit more intelligent and a little bit less primitive of a voidling creature. The Cheshire cat character where that sort of facial expression kind of takes inspiration from, that's a guy who's like really sneaky, really mischievous, really like stealthy almost, and kind of tricky and stuff. So maybe there could have even been some more elements of trickery in Omen's kit, maybe as a way to like protect himself as a defensive ability, since he'd be really squishy to really survive without a backup plan as well. One ability we do know for sure was something from Riot Feral Pony, who was a designer who worked on Omen, who mentioned that one version of Omen's ultimate was kind of similar to Misfortune's ultimate, but in a more artillery sort of style. Instead of firing in a big cone, Omen would hit like a small circle, but at a further range, kind of like a mini Gangplank ultimate that had to be channeled. And it actually sounds maybe a little bit underwhelming when you compare it like that, but, that's got to be one of the problems that occurs when you're doing so many frustrating iterations of a single champion and really failing to discover the perfect version on him. And, that version of the ultimate was pretty underwhelming to play with, and it just didn't work out, and eventually Omen got cancelled. And that just about wraps up everything we know about Omen's development. He's a really cool looking character, but unfortunately he just didn't have a place in League because of his huge identity crisis. And maybe Riot will play around with the spike throwing sort of idea on a champion in the future, but for the most part it seems like every failure with Omen's development was kind of fixed during the development of Rek'Sai, which isn't really that bad of a trade-off since she's pretty awesome, and you do actually have to remember that we might not have gotten Graves if Omen didn't get cancelled as well. And I'm definitely interested to know what you guys might have done to fix Omen's design in the first place, so definitely leave us your ideas in the comments below, and looks like that's gonna be it for me. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like, subscribe if you want. Thanks for watching, and of course, I'll see you guys next time.